They say history is written by the victors, but I'm more interested in how it's narrated by the survivors. My name isn't important, just another human journalist traversing interstellar routes, documenting the bizarre tapestry of our species' expansion across the stars. What is important, however, are the events I witnessed during that fateful week when humanity faced two unprecedented challenges: a cosmic entity known simply as death and the dreaded Terran Inspectors. Two separate incidents that occurred, galaxies apart yet, were inexplicably connected by the most human of qualities: our anomalous ability to improvise in the face of certain doom. I was fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, to witness both events firsthand. These are my accounts, unfiltered and unabridged, of how humanity once again proved itself to be the most perplexing species in the known universe. The crystalline hall of the Galactic Assembly on Crystalia shimmered with an ethereal glow as representatives from 17 sentient species gathered for what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic summit. The architecture itself seemed alive, pulsating with colors that shifted according to the emotional temperature of the room. Currently, it reflected cautious blues and diplomatic greens, though that would soon change. I sat in the press section surrounded by beings whose anatomies defied human description, all of us equipped with various recording devices designed to capture every nuance of interspecies politics. The human delegation, led by Ambassador Myra Solis, occupied a modest platform near the center of the hall. Despite decades of interstellar relations, humans remained somewhat of an enigma to the galactic community, respected for our rapid technological advancement, yet viewed with suspicion for what many species considered our inherent unpredictability. Ambassador Solis stood at the podium, her silver hair caught in the crystalline light, giving her an almost divine aura. Her voice, calm and measured, carried throughout the hall as she delivered what many would later call the Harmony Address. Distinguished delegates, honored representatives of the cosmos. She began her words automatically translated into 17 different languages. Humanity stands before you today, not as conquerors or competitors, but as humble collaborators in our shared journey among the stars. I've covered enough diplomatic speeches to recognize when someone is building toward a particularly poignant statement, and Myra was just reaching her crescendo when it happened. A piercing alarm cut through the hall, causing the crystalline walls to flash violent red. The Zran emissary, a towering obsidian-skinned being with 4 symmetrical arms, abruptly rose from their seat, activating a holographic projection above the central platform. The Zran Collective hereby declares formal hostile intent against Terran settlements in the Proxima sector. The emissary announced, their voice a metallic symphony of harmonics. Your continued exploitation of quantum rifts threatens the fabric of reality itself. This is not a negotiation, it is notification. The crystalline walls pulsed crimson as murmurs erupted across the hall. Ambassador Solis remained unnervingly calm at the podium, her fingers gripping the edges with white-knuckle intensity. I recognized that look. It wasn't fear I saw in her eyes. It was calculation. "Emissary," she replied, her voice cutting through the chaos. The Proxima quantum research stations operate within parameters established by the Galactic Science Consortium. If there are concerns, parameters are insufficient when extinction is possible, the Zran interrupted. Your species consistently pushes boundaries without comprehending consequences. We have observed 17 separate incidents where your research nearly collapsed entire star systems. The Crystalian Mediator, a luminescent being composed primarily of light and resonant energies, attempted to restore order. The Assembly acknowledges the Zran's concern. However, protocols for conflict resolution must be. Protocols have failed, the Zran emissary declared. Zran warships are currently en route to Proxima Centauri. We suggest all non-Terran personnel evacuate within 48 standard hours. The hall erupted in pandemonium. Delegates from neutral systems began hurriedly conferring with their homeworlds. The Crystalian Mediator's form flickered in distress, their light dimming to anxious amber. And yet through it all, Ambassador Solace remained at the podium, her expression unreadable. I activated my neural recorder, focusing on her, with journalistic instinct. Something unprecedented was about to happen, I could feel it. "If I may address the assembly once more," she said, her voice somehow cutting through the chaos without raising in volume. The hall gradually quieted, all attention returning to the human ambassador. "The Zran Collective has made their position clear," she continued. "However, before this assembly dissolves into panic, I believe it's appropriate to hear from all interested parties." A puzzled murmur rippled through the hall. The mediator's light pulsed questioningly. "All delegates present have been recognized, Ambassador." Myra Solace smiled. Not the diplomatic smile I'd seen her use countless times, but something ancient and knowing. "Not all parties are delegates, mediator." She reached into her formal diplomatic robes and withdrew what appeared to be a small, unremarkable river stone, smooth and gray. "In accordance with Statute 17 of the Assembly Charter, which permits cultural representatives during times of existential threat, humanity would like to call upon our oldest cultural ambassador." The mediator flickered in confusion. "We have no record of additional human representatives." "This representative predates records," Myra replied, placing the stone on the podium. She then produced a small blade, and before anyone could react, drew it across her palm. Crimson blood dripped onto the gray stone. "By ancient right, by the oldest human tradition," she spoke in a voice that suddenly seemed to echo from somewhere beyond the hall, "I call upon death to speak on behalf of humanity." The crystalline walls turned absolute black. The temperature in the hall plummeted so rapidly that breath clouded before stunned faces. The stone on the podium dissolved into shadow, spreading outward like spilled ink across water. From this darkness rose a figure that defied comprehensive description. It appeared simultaneously skeletal and fluid, draped in darkness that absorbed light rather than merely blocking it. Its face, if it could be called such, was a void, with distant stars, visible within as though looking through a window into the furthest reaches of space. Death had entered the Galactic Assembly. Several delegates fled immediately. Others remained frozen in what I can only describe as primordial terror. The Zran emissary stood rigid, their obsidian skin losing its luster. I fought every instinct screaming at me to run, forcing my trembling hands to continue recording. This was history, unfolding however terrifying. Ambassador Solace. Death spoke, its voice not a sound, but rather the absence of all other sound, creating words in the vacuum of silence. "It has been some time since your kind called upon me in such a formal capacity." Myra Solace, blood still dripping from her palm, bowed deeply. "The circumstances are unusual, Ancient One. Humanity faces extinction at the hands of the Zran Collective." Death's attention shifted to the Zran emissary, who visibly trembled, but maintained their position. I had to admire their courage. "You seek to eradicate humans," Death observed. It wasn't a question. The emissary, to their immense credit, found their voice. "They risk unraveling reality itself with their experiments. The collective good of all species outweighs—" "They are mine," Death interrupted. The simple declaration hung in the air like the aftermath of a supernova. No one moved. No one dared breathe. "I do not share what is mine," Death continued. "Humanity has belonged to me since they first recognized their own mortality. They are my favored children, the only species that both fears me absolutely and yet defies me constantly." Death moved, or perhaps the darkness that constituted its form simply rearranged itself closer to the Zran emissary. "They create art depicting me. They write stories where I am defeated. They imagine scenarios where they transcend my grasp. No other species has such audacity. It is entertaining." The emissary found a reservoir of courage. "They are dangerous, unpredictable." "Yes." Death agreed, something like amusement in its void voice. "Precisely why they are mine." I have watched them survive plagues that should have eradicated them, wars that should have reduced them to radioactive dust catastrophes that should have ended their evolutionary journey. Yet they persist. They adapt. They overcome. Death turned, addressing the entire assembly. I do not typically involve myself in the politics of the living. However I feel, I must clarify something for all present. The entity's form seemed to expand darkness, touching every corner of the crystalline hall. Any species that attempts to eradicate humanity will face my displeasure. The Zran believe they act to prevent extinction. I assure you my response to such actions would result in extinction, far more certainly. The Zran emissary's forearms trembled in unison. You would destroy an entire species for these reckless beings. Death's response was terrifyingly casual. I have harvested galaxies. Species rise and fall like breaths in the cosmic scale. But humans make existence interesting. So yes, emissary, I would. Ambassador Solace blood, now dried on her palm, stepped forward once more. Perhaps there's a diplomatic solution that doesn't require extinction for anyone. The Zran have legitimate concerns about our research. We're willing to establish additional safeguards with multi-species oversight. Death seemed to regard her with what might have been approval. Practical as always. This is why you survive. The Crystallian mediator, whose light had dimmed to near invisibility during Death's appearance, cautiously brightened. The Assembly could establish an oversight committee, with representatives from all concerned parties. The Zran emissary remained silent for several long moments before responding. The warships will stand down for now, but we require immediate cessation of all quantum rift experimentation until safeguards are implemented. Ambassador Solace nodded. Agreed. Death's form began to recede, condensing once more toward the stone on the podium. My purpose here is concluded. Remember my words, Assembly. Humanity remains under my protection, not because they deserve it, but because they amuse me. Few entities can claim such distinction. As suddenly as it had appeared, Death vanished, leaving only the smooth gray stone on the podium. The crystalline walls gradually returned to their normal luminescence, though now with an undercurrent of anxious purple. Ambassador Solace calmly collected the stone, returning it to her robes, as though she hadn't just summoned a cosmic entity to a diplomatic summit. I sat stunned in the press section neural recorder, still capturing every moment. This would redefine interstellar politics for generations. What I didn't know then was that across the galaxy, on Space Station Epsilon 7, humanity was facing a threat possibly more terrifying than extinction itself paperwork. While cosmic entities and galactic wars commanded my attention at the Assembly, approximately 37 light-years away, Captain Elena Rodriguez of Space Station Epsilon 7 was having what she would later describe as the absolute worst fucking day of my entire career. Epsilon 7 was humanity's busiest interstellar way station, a sprawling complex of modules, docking arms, and research facilities orbiting the gas giant Proxima 4. Over 2,000 personnel kept the station operational, servicing hundreds of vessels daily from across human and allied space. It was chaotic, vibrant, and, as Captain Rodriguez had just discovered, about to undergo a comprehensive safety inspection. They can't be serious, Rodriguez muttered, staring at the official notification on her holographic display. A full Tasha audit today. We haven't had one in 7 years. Tasha, the Terran Occupational Safety and Health Administration, was the bureaucratic nightmare that had somehow survived humanity's expansion into space. If anything, it had grown more powerful with interstellar colonization, amassing regulations specific to zero-gravity environments, exotic atmosphere handling, and quantum containment procedures. Communications Officer Walsh glanced nervously at the notification. It says Inspector Graves will be arriving in approximately 3 hours, Captain. Graves, Marcus Graves. Rodriguez paled visibly. The Black Mark, Graves. The very same, Walsh confirmed, looking equally disturbed. Apparently, he's completed 17 station audits this quarter alone. 12 resulted in critical safety violations and subsequent leadership replacements. Rodriguez straightened her uniform with shaking hands. Alert all department heads. Emergency meeting in my office in 15 minutes. And Walsh. Yes, Captain. Find me every single regulation manual we have. Physical copies, digital, whatever. And get Martinez to pull maintenance logs for the past 18 months. She paused, considering. Better make it 24 months. Graves is notorious for spot-checking random dates. As Walsh hurried to comply, Rodriguez sank into her chair mentally, calculating how many safety violations an inspector might find on a station as busy and chaotic as Epsilon 7. Too many. Definitely too many. 17 minutes later, the station's senior staff crowded into Rodriguez's office, anxiety radiating from them like heat from an overtaxed reactor. I won't sugarcoat this, Rodriguez began pacing behind her desk. We're screwed. We have critical violations in at least 16 different subsystems. The oxygen recyclers on Deck 7 have been operating on emergency protocols for 3 months. Engineering's been using duct tape, actual physical duct tape, from Earth to secure plasma conduits. And someone, she glared at Dr. Patel from Medical, has been storing experimental tissue samples in the communal food refrigerator. The medical cold storage is at capacity, Dr. Patel protested weakly. And they're properly sealed. That's not the point. Rodriguez slammed her hand on the desk. Graves will shut us down for any one of these violations, let alone all of them combined. We have less than 3 hours to make this station at least appear to comply with basic safety regulations. Chief Engineer Torres raised a hand tentatively. We could redirect his tour. Keep him away from the worst areas. Graves isn't some tourist we can shuffle through the gift shop, Rodriguez replied. He has authority to access any part of this station at any time without prior notice. We need to fix what we can and create documentation for what we can't. Create documentation, Security Chief Mendez echoed, frowning. You mean falsify records? Rodriguez winced at the blunt phrasing. I mean provide context for our operational necessities. Look, everyone in this room knows that half of Tosha's regulations are written by people who've never set foot on an actual space station. Sometimes we have to adapt. So we're lying, Mendez clarified. We're surviving, Rodriguez countered. Just like we always do. Now here's the plan. What followed was the most frantic 2 hours and 43 minutes in Epsilon 7's operational history. Crews were mobilized across all decks. Emergency maintenance protocols were enacted. The station's AI was temporarily reprogrammed to redirect Inspector Graves away from particularly problematic areas, a measure Rodriguez knew wouldn't work for long, but might buy precious minutes. In engineering, Chief Torres led a team frantically replacing duct-taped conduits with proper containment materials. Careful with that plasma seal, he shouted, as a junior engineer nearly dropped a critical component. If Graves sees a single piece of unauthorized adhesive, we're all getting reassigned to waste management on Europa. Meanwhile, in the station's vast documentation center, Walsh coordinated the most creative writing project in human history. We need to justify the oxygen recycler situation, he instructed a team of administrative personnel. Find me every regulation exception clause for emergency operations, fabrication if necessary. But sir, a young administrator protested, falsifying safety documentation is a... Did I say falsify? Walsh interrupted. I said, fabricate a comprehensive explanation utilizing existing regulatory framework to contextualize our adaptive implementation strategies. Got it. The administrator nodded slowly. So, creative writing. Exactly, now get to it. On Deck 7, Dr. Patel and a medical team were hurriedly relocating experimental samples from the communal refrigerator. Carefully, she cautioned, as a lab assistant transported a container of what appeared to be glowing fungal specimens. Those are sensitive to vibration. What even are these? The assistant asked, peering at the luminescent organisms. Potentially revolutionary adaptive bioforms that could revolutionize space medicine, Patel replied. Also, possibly sentient, but we haven't had time to check. And they were next to the lunch leftovers. Space is at a premium, Patel said defensively. Besides, the containment was secure, mostly. Throughout the station, similar scenes of desperate compliance were unfolding. Security personnel hastily installed proper signage on emergency exits. Maintenance crews painted over rust spots with questionable, space-grade coating that was really just regular paint with glitter mixed in for effect. One particularly creative team was attaching small emoji stickers to critical systems lacking proper warning labels. "Why the smiley face on the emergency oxygen release?" Rodriguez demanded as she conducted a pre-inspection walkthrough. Maintenance technician Diaz shrugged. "We ran out of skull and crossbones. But look, I drew little flames coming out of his head to indicate danger." Rodriguez closed her eyes, counting slowly to 10. "Replace it with a proper warning label within the hour." "We don't have any," Diaz admitted. "Supply requisition has been pending for 3 months." "Then draw a better warning. Make it obvious that pulling this lever without cause might kill everyone in the section." Diaz nodded earnestly, pulling out a marker. "So like a frowny face with X's for eyes." Rodriguez walked away before she could say something she'd regret. Her communicator buzzed with a priority alert from the docking control. "Rodriguez here." "Captain," came the tense voice of Docking Officer Miyazaki. "Inspector Graves' shuttle has requested expedited docking procedures. ETA 22 minutes. 22 minutes. Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. "Understood. Direct him to Alpha Docking Standard Reception Protocols." "And, Captain, he's requesting immediate access to all maintenance logs from the past 36 months. Not 24. 36. Of course he was. "Acknowledge the request. Tell him the logs will be available upon his arrival." She switched to the station-wide communication channel. "All personnel, this is Captain Rodriguez. Inspector Graves will be arriving in 22 minutes. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Complete all emergency compliance protocols immediately. Anything that cannot be fixed, document. Anything that cannot be documented, hide. Final inspection teams to your assigned areas now." As she concluded the announcement, Rodriguez found herself oddly calm. They wouldn't pass inspection, that much was certain. The question now was whether they'd fail badly enough for the station to be decommissioned, or merely badly enough for her to lose her command. In the final minutes before Graves' arrival, she found herself in the primary control room, watching the organized chaos on security monitors. Crew members were still rushing between sections, carrying documentation toolkits, and what appeared to be plants, hastily repurposed from the hydroponics bay to cover damaged wall sections. Walsh appeared at her side, looking as though he'd aged a decade in 3 hours. "Status report, Captain. Engineering has resolved 62% of critical violations. Medical has adequately explained all experimental storage. Documentation is creative but comprehensive." "And the oxygen recyclers on Deck 7? Walsh winced. "Still operating on emergency protocols, but we've documented 18 different justifications, citing everything from supply chain disruptions to theoretical quantum fluctuations." "Quantum fluctuations?" Torres contributed that part. "He says if anyone questions it, he can produce enough technical jargon to confuse even Graves." Rodriguez nodded absently, watching the shuttle carrying Inspector Graves make its final approach to Alpha Docking. "It'll have to be enough. Remind all personnel maintain professionalism, stick to the documentation, and for the love of Earth, no one mentions the duct tape." Alpha Docking's airlock cycled with ominous precision. Captain Rodriguez stood at attention, flanked by her senior staff, all in immaculately pressed uniforms that hadn't seen use since the station's commissioning ceremony 5 years earlier. Through the airlock stepped Inspector Marcus Graves, a slender, austere man with silver hair, cut in a severe military style, despite Tosha's civilian status. His black uniform bore no insignia beyond the simple Tosha emblem, yet he carried himself with the authority of an admiral. The stylus in his breast pocket, an actual physical writing implement, rather than a digital one, was rumored to have ended more careers than a political scandal. Captain Rodriguez. He greeted, his voice as dry as lunar dust. Space Station Epsilon 7 is now under official safety review. I'll require immediate access to your control center, followed by a comprehensive tour of all operational areas. Rodriguez extended her hand, which Graves ignored. Welcome aboard, Inspector. We've prepared all requested documentation and... I prefer to observe first, then review documentation. Graves interrupted, already moving past the reception committee. Documentation has a curious tendency to diverge from reality. And so began the most excruciating 4 hours of Elena Rodriguez's professional life. Graves moved through the station like a scanning laser, missing nothing. His stylus flicked across his inspection tablet with increasing frequency as they progressed through decks 1 through 5, the most presentable sections of the station. These emergency signage placards are 2.3 centimeters too low, he noted in Corridor C. Regulation height is 162.7 centimeters from deck level. We'll adjust them immediately, Rodriguez assured him. Your fire suppression system in Laboratory 4 shows a response time of 4.2 seconds. Regulation maximum is 3.8. We're awaiting replacement components, Rodriguez explained. The documentation includes our requisition orders and temporary accommodation protocols. Graves made a non-committal noise, making another note. And the expiration date on these emergency ration packs? Rodriguez felt sweat beading at her hairline. There's an explanatory appendix in Section 7 of our documentation package that addresses supply rotation schedules. With each passing deck, Rodriguez's hope diminished. Graves found violations she wasn't even aware existed: obsolete wiring standards, improper labeling conventions, insufficient clearance between storage containers. By the time they reached Deck 6, she had mentally begun drafting her resignation. Then came Deck 7, home of the jury-rigged oxygen recyclers. As the inspection team approached the environmental control section, Rodriguez's communicator buzzed with a priority message from Torres. Recycler 3 just failed completely. Martinez is inside the housing trying to restart it manually. Do not bring Graves here. Rodriguez felt her career flash before her eyes. Inspector, she began desperately. Perhaps we should review the station's emergency response protocols before continuing. My office has a comprehensive... Is there a reason you're attempting to redirect me, Captain? Graves asked, his eyes narrowing. Section 12.4 of TASHA regulations specifically prohibits interference with inspection routing. No interference intended, Rodriguez insisted, heart pounding. Simply trying to optimize your valuable time. My time is best optimized by following standard inspection protocols. Graves replied coldly, continuing toward environmental control. Which brings us to the oxygen recycling systems, a critical component frequently overlooked in station maintenance. Rodriguez sent a frantic text-only message to Torres. Evacuate Recycler 3 immediately. The doors to environmental control slid open, revealing a scene that would feature prominently in Rodriguez's nightmares for years to come. Engineer Martinez was halfway inside Recycler 3's maintenance housing legs, kicking as he struggled within its mechanical innards. 3 other engineers were gathered around him, one holding a toolbox, and another grasping what was unmistakably a roll of duct tape. The recycler itself was making a sound. No piece of life-supporting equipment should ever make a high-pitched whine interspersed with metallic clangs. Time seemed to stop. Rodriguez watched Graves' expression transition from professional detachment to stunned disbelief, to something approaching horrified fascination. Is that, Graves began slowly, an engineer inside an active oxygen recycling unit being assisted by personnel wielding unauthorized adhesive materials? Before Rodriguez could formulate any response, Martinez's muffled voice emerged from within the recycler. Hand me the duct tape. The primary coupling is completely shot. The engineer holding the tape looked up, finally noticing Graves. The roll of forbidden adhesive slipped from his fingers, bouncing across the deck in what seemed like slow motion, coming to rest directly at the inspector's polished boots. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the continued alarming sounds from the recycler and Martinez's oblivious requests for the now-abandoned tape. Graves stared at the silver roll by his foot, then at Rodriguez, then back at the roll. With deliberate slowness, he bent down and picked it up, turning it over in his hands as though he'd discovered an artifact from an alien civilization. Standard issue duct tape, he observed, his voice unnervingly calm. Manufactured on Earth. Explicitly prohibited for use on life support systems by no fewer than 27 distinct TASHA regulations. Rodriguez opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words emerged. Martinez chose that moment to back out of the recycler housing coveralls, stained with lubricant, and face streaked with mechanical grime. Got it stabilized, but we really need that. He froze mid-sentence, finally registering Graves' presence. Oh, indeed, Graves replied, still holding the duct tape. Perhaps you could explain what maintenance procedure you were performing. Martinez looked to Rodriguez with panicked eyes. She gave him the smallest nod. No point lying now. Emergency repair, sir, Martinez admitted. Recycler 3's primary coupling assembly failed 3 months ago. Replacement parts are back-ordered from Earth Manufacturing. We've been maintaining operational capacity through creative engineering. Creative engineering, Graves repeated flatly. You mean utilizing prohibited materials and non-standard procedures on equipment responsible for the respiratory viability of this entire deck? Yes, sir, Martinez confirmed miserably. But it works. Graves turned to Rodriguez, his expression unreadable. Captain, I believe I've seen enough of Deck 7. Shall we proceed to your office to review the documentation you've prepared? I'm particularly interested in how you've documented these creative engineering solutions. The walk back to her office was the longest of Rodriguez's life. Graves said nothing further, merely making occasional notes on his tablet, while maintaining a thoughtful silence that was somehow worse than open condemnation. In her office, Graves methodically reviewed the mountain of hastily prepared documentation. Hours passed. Occasionally, he would request clarification on particular points, his questions precise and emotionless. Rodriguez answered honestly. There seemed little point in further deception. Finally, as the station's lighting shifted to evening cycle, Graves set down his tablet and fixed Rodriguez with a penetrating stare. Captain, he began. In my 15 years as a TOSHA inspector, I have never not once encountered a station with more comprehensive safety violations than Epsilon 7. Rodriguez nodded, resigned. I understand, Inspector. I take full responsibility. My resignation will be processed immediately. Graves held up a hand. I wasn't finished, Captain. As I was saying, I have never encountered a station with more comprehensive safety violations. Nor have I encountered a crew more inventive in addressing those violations with limited resources. Rodriguez blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. Sir, your oxygen recyclers should have failed catastrophically months ago. Yet your engineering team has maintained operational capacity through methods that, while prohibited, demonstrate remarkable ingenuity. Your medical facilities are overcrowded, yet maintain sterile protocols through unorthodox but effective means. Even your documentation, hastily assembled as it clearly was, shows attention to regulatory framework that suggests genuine concern for safety principles, if not their exact implementation. He leaned forward, hands clasped on her desk. Do you know why TOSHA regulations exist, Captain? To ensure the safety of Terran personnel in hazardous environments, she recited automatically. Precisely. And despite your numerous violations of specific regulatory requirements, you have maintained an exemplary safety record. 0 fatalities. Injury rates 42% below similar stations. Atmospheric contamination incidents at minimal levels. Graves sighed, suddenly looking every year of his considerable age. The purpose of regulations is to protect lives, not create bureaucratic obstacles. Your station operates outside regulatory parameters, yet achieves the fundamental goal those regulations were designed to serve. He made a final note on his tablet, then set it aside. I will of course be citing Epsilon 7 for 273 distinct safety violations. Rodriguez's momentary hope collapsed. I understand. However, Graves continued, I will be recommending a special dispensation under TOSHA Directive 17B, which allows for alternative compliance methodologies in frontier installations where standard supply chains are compromised. Alternative compliance, Rodriguez repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You will be required to document all non-standard procedures with engineering justifications and safety outcomes. These will be reviewed quarterly. Additionally, I will be expediting your supply requisitions for proper replacement components. Graves stood straightening his immaculate uniform. You've created a functioning station with impossible constraints, Captain. That deserves recognition, not punishment. Now, if you'll process my inspection forms, I'll be departing. I have 16 other stations to inspect this quarter. Rodriguez, stunned, called for Walsh to process the required paperwork. As they waited for him to arrive, she found her voice again. Thank you, Inspector. But I have to ask why... Graves almost smiled. Because sometimes, survival requires creativity. Is that not the most fundamental human trait we adapt? We overcome. We find solutions where none should exist. He paused. Just document the duct tape usage moving forward. By the time Inspector Graves departed Epsilon 7 6 hours later, Captain Rodriguez had already implemented new documentation protocols for all non-standard repairs. The station would remain operational, her command intact. What neither Rodriguez nor Graves knew was that while they were navigating the treacherous waters of regulatory compliance, humanity's very existence was being negotiated in a crystalline hall, light years away, with an entity as implacable as bureaucracy, but infinitely more ancient. I remained in the crystalline hall long after most delegates had departed, frantically composing my report on Death's unprecedented appearance. The diplomatic implications were staggering. Humanity now stood under the explicit protection of a cosmic entity that even the most advanced species clearly feared. Ambassador Solis was surrounded by her staff, engaged in intense discussion about the Zran situation, looking remarkably composed for someone who had just summoned death itself. This wasn't your first encounter with it, was it? I asked when I finally managed to secure a moment with her. Myra glanced at the stone she still held now, apparently just an ordinary river rock once more. Humanity has a long relationship with death, she replied carefully. Most species evolve to avoid it. We evolve to understand it, to make peace with it in our way. By turning it into stories, art, cultural touchstones, I observed. Precisely, she pocketed the stone. The Zran fear death because they only see it as an end. Humans see it as a transition, a natural counterpart to life. We've personified it, bargained with it in our legends, even befriended it. That gives us a relationship no other species has. And now that relationship has become diplomatic leverage, I noted. Myra smiled enigmatically. Everyone negotiates with death eventually. Humans just started earlier than most. My neural recorder captured her words, but I couldn't help feeling there was more to the story, something fundamental about humanity that both cosmic entities and bureaucratic systems seemed to recognize, even if they approached it from opposite directions. Days later, as I compiled my reports on both incidents, the supernatural confrontation at the Galactic Assembly and the bureaucratic showdown on Epsilon 7 patterns began to emerge. In both cases, humanity faced existential threats, extinction from the Zran operational collapse from TOSHA regulations. In both cases, the threats came from systems designed to maintain order, galactic diplomatic protocols, safety regulations. And in both cases, humanity's survival hinged not on superior technology or force, but on our peculiar relationship with systems larger than ourselves. Death had called humans entertaining for our constant defiance of mortality. Graves had acknowledged our creativity in overcoming impossible constraints. Different words for the same quality, our anomalous ability to operate outside expected parameters while still achieving fundamental goals. Perhaps that's why the galaxy finds us so unsettling. We break rules, yet survive. We ignore impossible odds. We use duct tape on oxygen recyclers and summon cosmic entities to diplomatic summits. We are, by any rational standard, unpredictable. Yet in that unpredictability lies our greatest strength. Death understands this. Surprisingly so did Inspector Graves. The rest of the galaxy is still catching up. As for me, I'll continue documenting humanity's improbable journey among the stars. Next week, there's a first contact situation developing in the Sirius system, and rumors of an unprecedented quantum breakthrough that might revolutionize interstellar travel, or accidentally create a pocket universe depending on who you ask. Just another typical week for the most anomalous species in the galaxy. They say journalism is the first draft of history. If that's true, then humanity's history among the stars reads like an improvised symphony, chaotic beautiful, and utterly unpredictable. We summon death as an ally, and treat bureaucracy as a puzzle to be solved rather than a master to be obeyed. No wonder the galaxy can't quite figure us out. We're still figuring ourselves out one impossible situation at a time. This has been your human narrator reporting from the edges of known space, where the rules are suggestions and survival is the only true constant. Until next time, remember the wisdom of both Inspector Graves and death itself. Our greatest strength lies not in our technology or our diplomacy, but in our relentless, anomalous creativity in the face of certain doom. Next week, we continue making history one impossible survival at a time.